He was 37 years old, respected and successful. The kind of man to whom whole cities send their children to study under. And then one day a stranger grabbed the reins of his horse in the middle of a marketplace, asked him one question, and he fell to the ground unconscious. When he woke up, he was a different man. He would spend the rest of his life trying to explain what happened in those few seconds. Today, 800 years later, can we understand? This is the story of how a respected Islamic scholar named Jalaluddin Muhammad became the man world now simply calls Rumi. Before he was a mystic, before he was a poet, before his words were printed on coffee mugs and whispered at weddings, Rumi was, by every account, an accomplished and highly respected religious teacher. He was born in 1207 in a Persian-speaking region of what is now Afghanistan. When he was a young child, his family fled west, likely to escape the advancing Mongol armies that were tearing through Central Asia. They moved from city to city, Iran, Baghdad, Damascus, before finally settled down in a town called Konya in present-day Turkey, when Rumi was about 19. Konya at the time belonged to a different world than the one Rumi was born into. It had recently been part of the Byzantine Empire, which is actually where his name comes from. Rumi simply means the Roman. His father had been a respected theologian, and the expectation was simple. Rumi would inherit that role, and he did. He trained for years under his father's esteemed students, studying Islamic law and the deeper mystical tradition of Sufism, until he eventually inherited his father's position as head of a religious school. By his 30s, he was a jurist, issuing religious rulings, teachings in mosques, respected by the kind of people who don't give respect easily. If history had stopped here, Rumi would be a footnote, a competent 13th century legal scholar among hundreds of others. There would be no poetry, no global bestseller 8 centuries later. But in November of 1244, someone walked into Konya that history could not ignore. His name was Shamsuddin Muhammad, though almost everyone simply called him Shams of Tabriz. Shams meaning sun. Nobody fully agrees on who Shams actually was. Some accounts describe him as a dervish who had spent years wandering, weaving baskets and selling clothes for a living, before he ever crossed paths with Rumi. By most descriptions, he was a kind of man polite, society overlooked entirely. And yet, depending on which version of the story you trust, he is either the most important spiritual encounter in the history of Persian literature, or a man who may have barely existed at all outside of a legend. Here's the story almost every account agrees on. The historic meeting between Jalaluddin Muhammad Rumi and the wandering dervish Shams of Tabriz took place in Konya on November 15, 1244. This simple encounter instantly disrupted Rumi's life, shifting him from a sober, orthodox Islamic jurist into an ecstatic mystic and poet. While the exact historical dialogue is heavily mythologized, early primary texts in Sufi oral traditions preserve two main accounts of how they met. Account 1. The most historical accepted account is this. Sultan Walid, son of Rumi, recorded in early biographies, when Rumi was riding a horse or donkey through the marketplace of the sugar merchants in Konya, surrounded by his students, Shams Tabrizi, dressed in dark traveler's robes, stepped forward out of the crowd, grabbed the bridle of Rumi's mount, and demanded an answer to a theological riddle. The question Shams Tabrizi asked, who is greater, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, or the Sufi mystic Bayezid Bastami? Rumi answered that Muhammad was infinitely greater, as he was the seal of the prophets. Shams countered, then why did Muhammad say to God, I do not know you as you deserve to be known? While Bastami cried out, glory be to me, how great is my majesty. To this Rumi explained that Muhammad's spiritual capacity was like an ocean. No matter how much divine light filled him, he always thirsted for more. Bastami's capacity was small. A single drop of divine consciousness filled him completely, causing him to overflow with ecstatic speech. Upon hearing this profound answer, Shams realized he had found the companion he was searching for. According to some accounts, Rumi was so overwhelmed by the spiritual energy of the exchange that he fainted and fell from the horse. Another highly famous account focused on the clash between book learning and direct divine experience. Rumi was sitting near a fountain or a pool in Madrasa courtyard, reading through a rare collection of handwritten theological manuscripts with his disciples. Shams walked past, looked at the irrepressible text, and asked, "What is this?" Rumi dismissively replied, "This is something you cannot understand." Shams immediately took the books and threw them into the pool. Horrified, Rumi pulled them out only to find the pages completely bone dry. When a stunned Rumi asked how this was possible, Shams threw his own words back at him. "This is what you cannot understand." Regardless of which event triggered, the immediate consequence was a complete rupture of social norms. Rumi abandoned his teaching post, his family, and his sermons. The two men locked themselves away in a private room for a period of intense spiritual seclusion and fasting that lasted between 40 days and several months. When Rumi emerged, his reliance on books was shattered. He began listening to music, composing poetry, and spinning around pillars in ecstasy, marking the birth of what the world knows today as Rumi. The intense spiritual companionship between Rumi and Shams of Tabriz provoked deep jealousy, resentments, and hostility among Rumi's family, disciples, and the wider community of Konya. This increased tension directly caused the permanent disappearance of Shams. Before Shams arrived, Rumi was a prestigious Islamic jurist, mufti, and teacher, heading a bustling madrasa. When he locked himself away in months of seclusion with Shams, his thousands of devoted students felt abandoned and neglected. Defying social norms, disciples watched their revered orthodox legal scholar trade traditions sober prayers for ecstatic poetry, music, and whirling dances. To conservative eyes, this transformation bordered on heresy and brought shame upon Rumi's established name. Shams was an eccentric, unapologetic, and rugged wandering dervish who did not conform to societal expectations. He openly insulted the pedantic academic posturing of Rumi's top students, directly wounding their egos. The rising tide of death threats and verbal abuse in 1246 drove Shams to flee Konya for Damascus. Rumi fell into a state of profound, debilitating grief, practically ceasing to teach or write. Realizing that his father was wasting away, Rumi's elder son Sultan Walad tracked Shams down in Syria. He begged Shams to return, promising that the disciples had repented of their cruelty. Shams returned to Konya, but the truce was short-lived. The jealousy reignited with greater fury, eventually culminating in Shams' final permanent disappearance. Historians and biographers point to two major historical theories regarding this fate. One version says this: on the night of December 5th, 1248, Rumi and Shams were sitting together talking. When Shams was called to the back door, he stepped outside and was never seen again. What actually happened to him is one of history's genuine unsolved mysteries. One version of the story claims he was murdered by disciples who could no longer stand the jealousy his closeness with Rumi provoked. Another holds that he simply left of his own will, slipping away the way he always had, and lived out his remaining years quietly in a town called Koi in Iran, where a tomb said to be his still stands today. For over a month, Rumi simply refused to accept that Shams was gone. He waited, and after 40 days passed with no word, he finally began wearing black, accepting the loss. He traveled to Damascus himself, searching the streets for any sign of his mentor. And it was there, according to his own letter writings, that something shifted in him one final time. He realized he did not need to keep searching outward, because what he had been looking for has become part of him. That single realization that the beloved you are grieving might already live inside you became the seed of nearly everything Rumi wrote for the rest of his life. This is the part of the story that's easy to miss when you only encounter Rumi as a quote on a poster. Rumi has lost someone completely, mysteriously, and without any closure. And he never got the chance to ask that one question every grieving person wants answered: why? And out of that unresolved grief came the Divane Shamse Tabrizi, a sprawling collection of lyric poetry, composed almost entirely in mourning, that immortalized Sham's names forever. Rumi went on to write for decades after. His most famous work, the Masnavi, came later in life, encouraged by another companion after Shams was gone. But scholars widely agree on one thing: without that 40 days, without that disappearance, without that grief, there is no Rumi as we know him. There is only Jalaluddin, the competent jurist of Konya, lost to history like thousands of scholars before him. Today, people read Rumi's lines about love and longing and assume he is speaking only of romance or only of God or only of loss. The truth is probably that he stopped drawing a line between the three. For Rumi, loving a person, loving the divine, and surviving grief all became the same act, expressed in the same words. Maybe that's why 800 years later, his words still travel so easily across religions, languages, and continents that have nothing else in common. He wasn't writing about Shams alone, he was writing about the universal shape of losing someone you needed and somehow finding a way to keep speaking anyway. Rumi died in 1273 in the same city where he had met Shams nearly 30 years earlier. His funeral, by most accounts, drew mourners from every faith in Konya: Muslims, Christians, and Jews, all claiming him as their own. In the next episode, we'll go past the biography into the actual idea Rumi spent his life trying to put into your words. The line you have probably heard 100 times without knowing what he meant by it: the wound is where the light enters.